Good morning. Thank you everyone for joining us for our new Sales Frontier 2.0 webinar with one of Charlie's valued partners, Pam from SalesCore. Pam, I'll let you kick it off here.
Great. Thanks, Maria. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Pam Beek, president and founder of SalesCore. We're a sales effectiveness firm, and we've been in business for a little over 20 years. And my heart is really to bring to the mid-market ways to compete with some of the larger businesses, because the larger businesses have been selling differently already. And as a mid-sized business, we're looking to help those mid-sized businesses compete. And one way to do that is to keep up with the research. We are calling this the new Sales Frontier 2.0 because we've been talking about these different changes in sales since 08, 09. And we have used research throughout the years to understand what's happening in the world of sales, what's changing in the world of sales. And of course, some really good research came out after COVID, and we culled through all of that research from LinkedIn, from HubSpot, from Gartner, Salesforce, and Korn Ferry. And we pulled all of that together, and lo and behold, the changes that were happening in 08, 09 to create the new Sales Frontier, they have been intensified since COVID. And that's why we're calling it the new Sales Frontier 2.0. And it's about the culture of sales in today's selling environment. All of the research came from people who are making decisions today and the people that you're selling to today. They also pulled some research from high-performing salespeople and from leaders. And so today we're going to focus a lot on what have the buyers said, what have the decision makers said that is working for them and is not working for them. So we'll go through that research, and then we'll talk a little bit about how your salespeople can stand out. And then we'll talk to leaders and how to make sure you have the right people to execute on what's happening in the new sales world today, using the great tool that Charlie has to help us make some of those decisions. I have been using Charlie for the entire time that I've had my business, over 20 years. And I can tell you from experience and from the data that Charlie has, this is a very effective tool to understanding not only who you're hiring, but also your current employees and how are they fitting into this world and this new sales frontier. So without further ado, I'm going to get into, let's start talking about what's changed in sales, what's the research, then we'll go how to stand out and talk about what you can do as leaders. I'm going to share with you this great clip.
Are they all here? All but one. Well, I'm going anyway. Let's talk about something important. Put that coffee down. Coffee's for closers only.
If you don't recognize that particular clip, it is from Glengarry Glen Ross, very old sales movie, somewhat depressing, but it really points out and stands to point out what sales used to be. Always be closing and trial closes and all the tips and tricks, and those things don't work anymore. What is really working, and we know this from the research, is more collaboration, cooperation, and really coming alongside of your buyers and sitting next to them and helping them solve problems. What I want to do is go through a little bit of the history of selling and how did we get here, and what is this new selling environment. So we start in the 40s. In the 40s is when sales was really recognized as a profession. That's when it started. And it was all about relationship. I know your dad's a good guy, I'm going to buy from you. And then we went to the 50s and we said, okay, not only is your dad a good guy and I'm going to buy from you, but tell me more about the features and benefits of your products. And then we skipped a couple of decades. We went to the 80s in selling solutions. That's why you still hear solution selling today, but it stops at just the solution and not the result. So in the 90s, we started talking about accelerating results, and we started talking about ROI models. So the numbers became very important in that sales process so that we could prove out, here's what your investment's going to give you. And then we had that lovely environment of 08, 09, when we had the recession, and it changed selling forever. It was starting to change in the early 2000s because of what the internet was doing to give buyers more information in their hands. And then we really had the environment where, because of the collapse of the banks, we had a lot more decision making that was by committee and not necessarily by one person. So decision making was raised up in the organization. And so we started with this concept of insight selling. And this comes from several different books also that we have pulled research from, things like Life After the Death of Selling and Exceptional Selling. We talk a little bit about challenger selling from the why, not necessarily how to execute. So those in The Lost Art of Closing, those are really good books to give you some information on insight selling, but I'll describe what insight selling really encompasses. And if you take nothing else from this webinar, I hope that you take these 3 bullet points. Before you can have the right to talk to a decision maker, you need to understand 3 items. The first one is, what are their industry issues? The second one is, what are their specific issues? And the third one is where we've helped others solve those problems before. So it's industry issue, their specific issue, and where we've helped others solve the problem before. And I have a real life example of that. And this is actually back from the 08, 09 era. I had this friend, his name was Mike, and Mike was the VP of IT at Frisch's. If you don't know Frisch's, it's a fast food chain, sit down, but still fast food, big boy. And as the VP of IT, he would get all of these voicemails and emails from salespeople. And what he would do is he would play a game with the salespeople that he had worked with in the past, including myself. And we would play the thumbs up, thumbs down game. Thumbs up, call them back. Thumbs down, don't call them back. One day, Mike sent us all an email and said, thumbs up or thumbs down. And the email was, Mike, point of sale systems are very important to gathering data from your stores. We know that you're having issues implementing your new point of sale system. We've helped Bob Evans, Ruby Tuesdays, they named a couple of others. Would you like to talk? That was definitely a thumbs up message. Industry issue, the point of sale system being important, their specific issue, having a difficult time implementing, and who they've helped before. That salesperson got the meeting, and that salesperson got the business because he came to the table not asking the question, what's your pain and what keeps you up at night? We can no longer approach decision makers in that manner. I actually have a client in Dayton who had an individual from the technical sales team go into a relationship of his had moved to a new company. And so he wanted to have that conversation. So he went in and he said, what's your pain? What keeps you up at night? And the decision maker said, I thought you were coming to solutions with my pain, and we don't have anything else to talk about. And he's tried for 2 years to get back in that door, and he can't. So this is not just something that is made up. This is something that's really happening in the world, and we see it all the time. And then COVID hit. And COVID has intensified, which is now what we're calling Insight Selling 2.0, because we have a lot of data that says this is actually what's happening in the world. So if we were talking about relationship selling, you all would probably say, we are a relationship sale. How does insight selling help us build relationships? And insight selling definitely does help build relationships, because relationships are developed and maintained differently today than they ever have been. And what that means, relationship means today, is you're going to help me solve a business problem, or you're going to help me connect with people that can help me solve my business problem, which means we have to understand the business problem before we get to the decision maker. And that takes a lot of skill on the salesperson's part. And we call this our right to win. So as a sales manager, sales leader, if you're looking to your salespeople and you're talking about new opportunities and walking into the decision maker, we should be asking, what's your right to be there? What's your right to win? And one of my philosophies is, when I go on a sales call, it is, did I leave them something of value that they would have paid for that sales call? Which is something very different than salespeople have been trained for in the past. So it's a flip of the thinking that we have to start bringing value to that first meeting. Otherwise, we are not going to get anywhere with the prospect. So this is something that we're starting to get into the research portion of the content here. This is what the research is saying, and the power of insight in insight selling. The reps offer unique and valuable perspective on the market. So how do I fit in the marketplace? If a sales rep comes in and says to me, look, you've got this competitor and they're moving in this direction, that's something of value to me. They help me navigate alternatives. I see this more and more today than I ever have. The question from my prospects, tell me how you compare to your competitors. What makes you different? They're asking that boldly. Provide ongoing advice and consultation. Help me avoid potential landmines and educate me on new issues and outcomes. The decision makers that we're talking to today don't necessarily have all the time to gather that information, and they're expecting that from their sales reps. And they're expecting from their suppliers to be easy to buy from and have widespread support across my organization. So in other words, we have different layers of relationship throughout the organization. We can go deep. You can go deep in our organization. They want that once you've proven yourself. So let's talk about how we stand out in this post-pandemic environment. This is straight from the research. 65% of the sellers think they put their buyers first, but only 23% of the buyers agree. So in other words, salespeople aren't really projecting that the buyer is first. They're projecting, I have to meet a number. And buyers are becoming very frustrated with that perspective. And so it creates buyer apathy. And this is what the buyers are saying. This is why I don't call salespeople back. The seller meets my expectations, but doesn't exceed them. In other words, doesn't necessarily bring me that extra information that I'm looking for about the market or my own business. The seller is not considered a top resource for solving business problems. Not just technical problems, not just minor problems, it's the overall business. So how does what you sell connect to the business problem that I'm experiencing? I identify my needs and have a solution in mind before I engage the seller. The statistics before COVID were that 85% of the decision was already made before a prospect reached out to a vendor. So that's a challenge for the salespeople, because that education piece is not as important because they can get that information elsewhere on the internet. The challenge for us as salespeople is companies will identify a need, but sometimes they don't always understand what their need is. And so the solution that they have in mind may not be the right solution. And so as salespeople, we have a challenge to take them back in that progress and that progression of the sales process and figure out what is their real need. And that's our job. there's only a small difference between sellers. And this goes back to, as a mid-market company, how do we compete with those larger organizations? And we have to start selling in a different way. There are times when a buyer is willing to reach out to a seller earlier in the process, when the decision's risky for the organization or they're facing a new challenge. Buying decision is very complex. They don't understand what their need is. Sometimes we find that people organizations start down a road to fix a complex problem. And again, not understanding their problem, they have to halt that progression. And that's a great opportunity for somebody to come in and really help them figure out what is the real problem. And is the buying decision is risky for the individual and their role in the organization. So they need help, they need support. So they will reach out in these moments, but most of the time, they're going to go ahead and develop their own solutions and then try to make you compare apples to your competitors. So we're going to talk now about how to stand out. How do we deal with this? There are a few tips. We could go deeper, but we're going to just talk about some high-level things today. The first thing is to seek out buyers who prefer early engagement. The buyers who prefer early engagement, are the charismatics. The charismatics are the ones that will reach out and start to have conversations. They typically are, they're people who are trailblazers and like to bring in new ideas and new thoughts to the organization. The challenge with charismatics, even though they've reached out, sometimes they reach out to get information and they use your information to make other decisions, or they waste your time because what they're trying to solve is not part of the strategic initiatives for their organizations. I'm working with a company right now who's more of an R&D organization, and they get used a lot for prototyping and those kinds of things when the project is not even connected with the strategic direction of the organization. So we're working to move some of that information back in the sales process so we can figure that out earlier. The other type of buyer types are very interesting. Thinkers are the type of folks that want to think it over before they make a decision. Earlier in my career, before I started my business, I was selling systems integration services, so ERP implementations, CRM implementations. And most of the audience that I was selling to were thinkers. And so one of the ways that I stood out, not like my competitors, but I would go through working through the scoping and the proposal section, and I wouldn't do the trial close with them. I would say to them, I understand you need to think it over. Can we make an appointment for next week or however long you need to think this over so that we can revisit this discussion? That made me stand out, not as a salesperson, but understanding who they were. Skeptics like a lot of data, and they'll push on the data and they'll push you to prove your data. So knowing your product, knowing your service, knowing what the results are really important to selling to the skeptics. The followers are typically those folks who will not take that risk. They're very risk averse. And again, you have to prove to them that this is a low risk decision. And then the controllers, those controllers are the people who like to control the sales process. So we have to create a sales process that helps them feel their control, but also leverages what control we need to have to make sure we're doing the right thing in our sales process and not wasting our time. So that's number one to standing out, is understanding who your buyers are. And if you can, seek out the charismatics, but also be very careful that they're not leading you down the primrose path. The second way to stand out is understand your buyer's business, which is what we've been talking about. An example of this is I was referred into a very well-known casket organization who was a division of a holding company that was a public company. And I was referred in to the COO. The COO said, of course, I'll sit down with this person because I came highly referred. And instead of preparing what keeps you up at night, what's your biggest pain, I went on to their annual report and just led the letter from the president. And that letter indicated the challenges that casket company was having in the environment where cremation is a much bigger trend. So their highest profit margin product was decreasing in volume. And I also understood that their customers, the funeral home directors, were really feeling the push, and the funeral home directors were pushing back on the casket company to say, what are you going to do to help us? So I walked into the meeting with the COO, his arms were crossed, and he said, what do you know about us? And I was able to share what I knew about what was happening in their largest profit margin product, what their customers were saying. We had a great 2-hour conversation. I built credibility, and that was my right to be there. My right was I was prepared. I knew about their business. I knew what was happening in their industry. What that means is no more pitches. So I didn't go in with a pitch about, here's all the things that we can do. Here's everything about us. I turned it around and talked about them. Now, sometimes our prospects are going to ask us to do some pitching, but we don't have a pitch until we understand more about them, and the pitch is more about them. I did it verbally. Sometimes you have to do it in a PowerPoint, and then you have 1 or 2 slides at the end about you. So it means flipping your pitch. The third way to stand out is to really understand what's going on in the organization from each individual silo and from each individual level within the organization. What we know today is communication, excuse me, between the silos and between the levels is at a very poor level. And we've gotten here because of some of the communication challenges that COVID brought to us. And I can tell you, I see this even in small organizations. I worked last year with a 12-person organization. They were a nonprofit, and 12 people in the organization. 2 of them were the ones that were talking and nobody else was talking. And I was able to take what the lower level in the organization was telling me and bring that to leadership to bridge the gap. That's a value to the business. Mr. Prospect, you think your problem is over here, but what we're seeing is this is a problem, and it's going to stand in your way of getting your strategic direction fulfilled. So we really have to focus on our customers and asking value-based questions like, what is this costing your organization? What is this costing your customer satisfaction scores? How is this impacting your business and your customers? We have to focus on the customer first. This, again, I thought was very interesting information from our buyers. And I thought that I would add this, and this is what they're saying, and how to kill a deal with me. First of all, delivering misleading information about your product or your price. And it still happens today where people don't know enough about their product, so they mislead and answer a question when they really don't understand it. Not understanding my company, my needs, not understanding their own product or service, not understanding their competitors' products or services. And I mentioned that a little bit earlier. I'm getting that question more and more today. How do you compare to your competitors? And then being able to answer that in a way that we don't bash our competitors, but really show the difference between the two. And I have in some situations have said, you know what, this person's probably a better fit for what you're trying to accomplish. Is affiliated with a brand that I don't trust. So having a very strong brand is important. Cold calling or emailing me repeatedly. And one of the things that we're hearing today even more is if it's an artificial intelligence, an AI generated email to me, I know that it's AI generated. I will not only delete it, but then I'm going to block that person. That is the great way to kill a deal. So let's talk about what does work and how to win a deal. The sales professional works for a company with a strong professional brand. In other words, strong integrity. If the buyer has a favorable impression of the sales professional, so not that they're trying to sell me something, they're trying to solve my problems. The sales professional is referred or recommended by someone in my professional network. So having that good reputation is very important. And you can tell by my casket example that I was referred in, he took the call, but I still had to do my homework. If the sales professional offers favorable pricing, and notice I did not say low price. I said favorable pricing. That means we have to show value and we have to connect it to how does spending this money help me solve my problem and what's it going to save me and what's my return, what's my total cost of ownership. And if the sales professional is informed about my company and my needs. So in other words, we really have to work on getting information from our network. And there are several ways that you can get this information. And we've been talking to salespeople about how do you do this? How do you get the information so that when you are in front of that decision maker, you're prepared? And there's several ways that we can do this, but it takes work on the salesperson's part. And it takes a little bit of change of behavior in what the salesperson does. We thought this was interesting and we thought we would share this with you. This is again from the buyers. The buyers have said 50% of the buyers say the purchase process is easier for them. And what we heard from the top performing salespeople, it's somewhat easier for them as well. It removes the need for late night dinner appointments. And the sellers are saying the same thing. We don't need to do these late night dinner appointments. And what we're seeing is in the beginning of the sales process that in the remote environment is much more productive, but then you earn the right to take people out to those late night appointments if that's what they want. You earn the right to take them and play golf. You earn the right to do those other things that we used to do earlier in the sales process. They like using data, more video, and more telesales. It makes it easier for them to do their job. I had this discussion with another organization this week where we talked about there's somewhat of a generational component to this as well. The younger generation really, they don't have the need or the desire to have those face-to-face meetings as much as some of the folks in the baby boomer world. So what's this telling us? First of all, we have to have our intel first before we walk in, before we ask for the appointment with the decision maker. Salespeople are change leaders, they're problem solvers, they're change leaders. If I'm going to go in and sell something to an organization that they're going to take and accept and adopt, I have to help them with the change piece as well. The reallys of this is we have to stand out or we're going to stand aside, and it won't be our decision, it will be our buyer's decision. Getting rid of old selling tactics. In other words, no more Glengarry, Glen Ross. Embrace digital sales and no more pitches. So let's talk about, as leaders, what do we need to do if we're in a leadership position? How do we need to focus on, do I have the right people? And it's not managing the change, but leading the change. What we've heard from the research is leadership is not necessarily understanding the need for this change. They are still looking for a quantity on a key performance indicator, not a quality. And it takes leadership to change that and trust to change that. If we change our environment to a quality call, then we are going to have a higher chance of closing business. And we know that from the research that has been delivered to us. I think this is a very interesting quote, and I'll let you take a minute to read this quote. And this was somebody that was actually interviewed in the research. So what Sahil is saying is, we hire for one thing, but our customers want something different. And so which comes first? And the answer is, we need both. So when we're looking at salespeople, we need salespeople that can have that grit, that stamina, that determination and perseverance when it comes to really being on top of their game and knowing their business. But they also have to match that with some compassion for what the customer wants and where the customer is coming from. So it's not an either or, it's an and. So jobs are changing and but the competencies are not changing. The one thing that we know from the research is the job changes a little bit, but the competencies don't. And that's where we're going to start talking about how can we look at the salespeople that we're hiring or the salespeople we have on board to help them become the best that they can be and pick the right people to be on our team. When we look at a current staff or a candidate, we look in these three buckets. We look at past experience, then we look at the can do and the will do. The can do is the competency that the Chally really pulls out based on the complexity of your buyer, the complexity of your product, and the type of selling or buying that our customers have, the style in which they want to make their decisions. We're going to start with a competency piece first, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Chally to talk about the will do, because they're great tools, not just for the competency piece, but also for the will do, the can do and the will do. This is directly from, modified from HR Chally's selling style models. And we talk about product complexity and buyer complexity. If you look on the low side on both, it's retail. I see you have that shirt in black. I think it would also look good in blue, and how can I help you? Closing, as you move more towards the product complexity, the higher complexity, it's more closing if the buyer complexity is low. This is how car sales used to be sold. This is how the car sales people sold. They had 7 trial closes before you left the lot, because they knew once you left the lot, their chances of closing you decreased by 50%. So they tried to close you right then and there. Fortunately, the internet has given us buyers a little bit more sophistication. So that's why you see now car dealerships talking about their salespeople as car consultants, and they all have different models now that they're using. But there is an opportunity for closing, and it can be a one call, more of a commodity type close. Then you go up to collaborative. And I'll mention, I had mentioned before that I was selling systems integration, and I was selling in the IT world before Y2K. So any VP of IT, any CIO would open their door to me. And then I became Vanna White, because quite frankly, I couldn't talk about a data warehouse, a data cube, a network. I became Vanna White. Here's my expert. I'm bringing my expert back. I do my dog and pony, bring my expert back. and let the expert do the consultative piece. Well, as buyers have become more sophisticated, they have said, I don't want that anymore. You need to know that information to even get my door open. But there still is an application for collaborative selling, and it's usually when you have manufacturers reps where we have to educate the reps, but we don't actually do the closing. We don't have the connection to the end user. We're educating. And my biggest interview question in this situation is, what's your favorite part of the sales process? And if it's a collaborative role and they say closing, I know they're not the right person for the job because they won't be motivated. And then you have the consultative selling where the buyer is complex, the product is complex, and you need to know that information beforehand. And we have these pretty little boxes, but you can have people who can straddle the boxes, and you may have 1 or 2, 3. I've had a client who's had all 4 boxes. So thinking about the selling style and then the competency that you match to that selling style is very important. So this is an example of competencies for a territory salesperson selling solutions, complex hunter, complex farmer. This comes right from Chally's research on what makes these particular salespeople successful. Chally has been in business studying predictive behavior since the mid-70s. It is not about personality. There is no statistical evidence that an introvert or an extrovert makes a good salesperson. I've known great introverted salespeople that have these competencies. And if you want more information on competencies, on different roles, certainly reach out to me, reach out to Chally. There's a wealth of information on the can-do piece. And now we're going to talk about the will-do. And I'm going to turn this over to Chally to answer these questions, to talk to these slides.
Thanks, Pam. Thank you so much. When people hear Chally, they usually think, oh, I use that for selection. I hire my candidate and then I don't look at it again. The great thing about Chally is it can be used across the life cycle of your employee. What we're going to talk about now is a framework from helping you understand an individual's capacity on a specific competency, and how that understanding can help you drive change, and that will do that what you're seeing on the job. So this is actually an annual plan using 3 different Chally tools that can be put into place day 1 of that hire. So you've looked at their results, you've hired them. What does it look like now from a first day employee experience? And we recommend that you share an individual's PAR report with them. If you're not familiar with that, it's our personal assessment results. It's unique in that it measures an individual's motivations and habits. So the motivations are what drives you, what gets you out of bed in the morning, and your habits are that personality piece. While we know that personality doesn't predict in specific sales roles, it is really good to understand, are you extroverted? Are you assertive? Are you competitive, and where you fall on that spectrum? By providing an individual their PAR report on day 1 and having them kind of sit down, dig into it, and review it, it allows them to be introspective about who they are that they might not have done before. I know I've been assessed on all types of assessments, and it's great to get an understanding of what my drivers are, what ticks, what makes up my personality. On day 7, we recommend that the manager, a colleague, stakeholder sit down and review that PAR with the individual and give that individual to an opportunity to share any insights that they may have already known about themselves that they want to share with that person, or something they might have learned about themselves. I'll give an example. One of the competencies on the PAR is get recognition. And I will share a little bit about how the PAR works on a future slide. But basically score, if you're far left, far right, it's a motivator for you, or it's a driver for you. If in the middle, you're neutral, it's not something that really gets you out of bed in the morning. So if you're far right on the PAR and get recognition, you like to be publicly acknowledged. You're the person that needs to be tell the team, I just made the biggest deal close of my career. My manager's proud of me. I'm on President's Club. They need that outward recognition, and they need to be up on that leaderboard. If you score on the far left of the PAR on get recognition, you still need that recognition. You need to know that you're doing a good job, and you need to know that you hit your sales goal. but you're going to be really embarrassed if your manager sends out an all company meeting saying, hey, Maria just closed this huge deal. And that could almost turn into a demotivator. So by sharing that insight with a manager or colleague, it helps the manager know, how to work with that person, how to acknowledge that person. So taking a look at the PAR with an individual gives both the manager, stakeholder, a lot of great insights that can be used in the entire working relationship. On day 30, we recommend you share the coaching and development report. Again, this is a newer report that we came up with. It takes all the great information in that selection report, but it takes the individual competency scores off of the report. So it removes a lot of the friction, negative feedback that you get when you sit down and you look at that. And this allows the manager and the individual to start talking about, what are your goals? What are we going to be working towards? So sharing that information and having that open dialogue with the individual. After you set goals with that individual, don't just review and do a goal review annually. You should do that at 90 days and quarterly, and then annually bring that back out, bring those goals back out, and bring those reports back out and take a look and see, are you seeing any changes if it was needed, or are you living up to your potential and getting that will that we're talking about. This is the motivations and behaviors. So the behaviors are those drivers that show up on the PAR report. So you'll see that there's task motivation, relationship motivation, and influence motivation. So how does that person show up day in and day out? And what this is great is it really shows you that fire in the belly, like I said, what gets you out of bed, and the motivation, the behaviors give you that personality piece. It's really good to have that understanding about the individual. Like I said, I'll hand this report to somebody that they've taken the assessment, they might be skeptical about it. This doesn't reflect me, and they'll take a look at this and they realize, oh, wow, this really is me. How did you know this about yourself? I remember my first day at Chally. I had the great honor to sit down with Howard and Sally Stevens, the founders, to review my PAR with me. And I thought, like, there's no way you could have known this about me. And they were able to just take this and make it come alive. And so it's just such great information that not a lot of people are aware that we measure. And what I always do when I'm out working with our clients is I'll always pull everyone's PAR reports and I'll do a team building exercise. And again, it gives you that self-awareness and awareness about others on your team, about how you can work together. So this is a great exercise. You run everybody's PAR report, you explain how it works, have them kind of look at it, digest it a little bit, and then you get them up and moving through the room. And you basically say, anybody that's left on this, go to this side. Anyone that's right, go to this side. Anyone in the middle, go to this side. And it really creates that dialogue. They can say, oh yeah, Pam, I do see where you'd be a far right on this. That makes sense, because when we work together, you do this and I do that, and that's why we work so well together. Or, oh, this might be causing friction for us because we're opposite on this, or we're exactly alike on this. So it usually takes about an hour and a half, 2 hours to get through the entire report. But the conversations that come out of that are great. I know when I was back in my account manager days, I was paired with an outside sales rep. We were actually going to facilitate at a client site, and we were just prepping and pulled our PARs out and looking at it. And I remember her saying, Maria, how are you attention to relevant detail? I would have said you thought you were attention to detail. She's like, I'm attention to relevant detail. It doesn't make sense how we can work so well together, because things would be dropping off the plate and we would be missing things. And I looked at her and I said, I know that it's not relevant to you until it's 2 weeks before, or a week before, or a couple days before. So it's relevant to me until I get to the point where I know I can hand it off to you and you're paying attention to it. And that clicked with us, and that made so much sense. And it actually improved our working relationship. Not that there was an issue with it. It's just we knew we could depend on each other, and it strengthened that connection. So those types of team building moments are invaluable when you're working with your team and you're taking a look at, how to make a stronger team and go in front of your clients as a united front. All right. And the last thing to do with in that kind of 30-day window is take a look at your coaching and development report. So this is really where you can take that competency and actually change it, see actual change on the job. So knowing where an individual falls, and for this example, it strives success toward by systematically managing account plan. Person, it's an area for development with them. You can see it gives the manager a coaching suggestion. And so what you can do is you can take that information and you start making SMART goals. Okay, you score lower on this. What is a goal that we can set for you so that you can start making your goal? What are some tools and processes we can put into place? Because I know it's not natural for you. So let's use this as an opportunity for me to create a learning and development plan for you. All right.
So we have gone through what our buyers have said. We've gone through some ways to stand out. We've talked about leadership, and the leadership piece here is making sure that you are working with your salespeople. One of the things the research told us is that sales leaders are spending so much more time now running reports and working inside the organization and not doing the number one thing that sales managers need to do, and that is coach and develop their people. And knowing what to coach and how to coach, these tools can really help you push the salespeople into a new stratosphere of the value that they can bring to their customers and to the organization.
If anyone has any questions, comments, key takeaways, I'm not sure that we can unmute you all, but you can use the chat function and I'll read them out and we can answer them for you. All right, we had a question come in, and I think it's for you, Pam. How have you used Charlie reports in your practice? What are some key takeaways that you have to help better use them?
The first thing is, first of all, use them, run them. Don't skip that step. It really does inform a lot of, if I'm working with a current staff member and assessing a current staff member, I want to make sure I understand first the organizational design and what that role really is supposed to be doing. One of the things that I see is a mistake organizations make is asking salespeople to do 2 or 3 different jobs all at once. And a perfect example is inside sales, inbound, inside sales, outbound, and customer service. They are 3 distinct roles. Excuse me. It is very clear with the work that we've done that you have to pull some of those competencies and those jobs apart. People are much happier. So when I did a staff assessment for an organization, we pulled apart the inside sales, inbound, and the customer service role apart. And we created those job descriptions as separate jobs. And then we went to the people who were doing both. And we asked them before we even told them what we thought the answer was, what's your favorite part? Amazingly, the customer service people said, if I never have to think about selling a customer, upsell or cross them again, I'll be happy. Conversely, the people who were really competent in the inbound calling side and selling, upselling, cross-selling, if I never have to deal with a customer service problem again, I'll be very happy. So you can use it in that assessment piece. We use it in the hiring piece a little bit later in the hiring process, maybe before final interview or after first face-to-face, to really dig into some questions to validate, does this person really have this weakness? And I can tell you most of the time they do. If they have developed a workaround, then good for them. And an example of a workaround, I was doing an assessment with an individual who was really hitting their numbers, and it was a hunting role. And their networking score was so low, it was in single digits. And I asked that individual, how do you develop leads? He says, I network. I was like, okay, how do you define networking? He said, I really hate those networking events. So I've developed this group around me and we share leads. that's a workaround, and that's a very effective workaround. So we can't use this as a pass-fail. We want to use this as what's a workaround? How can we work around these strengths and weaknesses?
Pam, that's a great tie into the next question. Are there resources, techniques, et cetera, that an individual can use to improve themselves based on their individual CHALI results? I'll start and then I'll have Jake and Pam chime in if that works. We do have for each of our benchmark profiles what we call our coaching and development toolkits. So if you're familiar with the profile interpretation manuals, it gives you that same top information, the definition of how we define networking for Pam's example, examples of high and low behaviors for that type of competency. And then it also gives you success tactics and so tools and success tactics that you can use as a manager to help you determine, does this person need a workaround, or are there mindset tips? Do we need to change the way they're thinking about it? So we do have that resource available. Jake, I know you've been implementing that kind of annual plan that we shared on a previous slide with your clients. You might have some other insights to share with that as well.
Yeah, so one of the really great things with the CHALI, and then when we talk about the new sales frontier as well, is thinking about how, a lot of people ask the question, is sales changing, or do you have to modify your skill set over your career to be successful? And the reality is yes. Now, what we found at CHALI is that the core functions and competencies that it takes to be successful in different types of selling remains the same, but how you implement that, whether it's through a digital call, or to Pam's point, you might have to change how your networking group actually meets or interacts over time, so that you need to really be adaptive to the needs of the buyer. Where we see like the biggest impact is when you have an individual who is constantly looking each year and going back to their results and then bringing up opportunities that they've seen fall out of their pipeline. So you really have to do a detailed kind of look back at why have we lost? I mean, we're all familiar with that. You want to go back through your why you lose particular opportunities, and then you want to go back to your CHALI results and say, okay, which of these competencies was there a potential roadblock that is exhibiting in this sales process? And then I pull the sales strengths report, which is our strengths. Basically the strengths that you scored highest in out of our entire 140 competency library. And then you also can use our leadership strengths report, which is a new report that we released last year that looks at your strongest leadership competencies out of the entire library. And then you map those to the particular area that you felt like it was a repeat reason for why you were losing opportunities. Then going back to the kind of IDP program that Maria just outlined, you really want to reinforce those skill sets in your growth and development process. So the best way to do that is then by setting goals for your your upcoming opportunities. So look at your pipeline and say, which of these opportunities and how am I going to implement those strengths within them? So you're reinforcing an area of potential weakness. You're looking at recent events and then utilizing that to build goals for your future events. And that's really what you want, both in yourself personally, and then also in your team. You need to look through the accountability process into a growth phase. And that's how we like to reinforce the learning.
Jake, I have a great example of that in my personal experience. I am not a patient person, and that comes out in any assessment that I've taken. And at one point in my career and my business, my close ratios went down drastically. I went to my pipeline, I looked at where is that happening, and it was happening right as I delivered the proposal. And what I realized was that I was being very impatient with my buyers. And so I put in an additional step in my sales process to slow myself down and to connect with the buyer and make sure the buyer understood what they were buying. And my close ratios went much higher. And knowing that weakness of mine and changing my sales process to overcome that really helped.
We have another question. In the team building exercise, are team members generally open to share their results? I know when I've done it, I'll generally ask my key contact if I'm at a client site, is this okay to do? Here's what I want to do. I don't think I've ever had anyone push back on it. The PAR result is pretty non-threatening. So people are usually willing to open up and share with their colleagues and have that conversation.
I found the same, Maria. I think the most important thing there is that you actually need to go through in the exercise before people are actually kind of discussing and talking, and provide some examples so that everyone kind of understands that it's not right or wrong to land somewhere in those kind of different areas. That's the most important thing, because just the way that the scoring is written, you don't want people to think that it's a numerical out of 100 type of a scoring rubric.
Yeah, that's a great point. I forgot about that since it's been a little while since I facilitated. I won't pass out their actual reports until after I've gone through at least 1 or 2 examples of the motivations section and 1 or 2 examples of the habits section. So to Jake's point, they know how to interpret it, and they don't have oh my gosh, I scored a 3 on this, when it really just means they're far left.
Do we have any other questions?
Don't have any additional on the chat. Feel free to type them in.
All right. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank the Chally organization. The support for this presentation has been fantastic. I've learned some things about the Chally that I didn't know, so I'm very appreciative of all the expertise. If you're not familiar with Chally, they are just an incredible resource for all of this research that's been done on predictive behavior. And it goes deep. It's been many years, and they continue to make sure that that research is up to date and really matches what's happening in today's world. So thank you, Chally. I very much appreciate the help, the support that you, not only for this presentation, but to my clients and for what we've been able to do through the tool. So thank you.
Yes, of course. And also really just want to thank Pam for her expertise and honestly the consultation throughout the understanding her process and how she works with teams, with complex sales cycles to help uncover ways that sales teams can effectively build new strategies and address the headwinds and challenges that we all face today. I think that's one of the most powerful part about the work that we do, is that these are real business problems and these are real challenges. Pam has worked with small businesses all the way up to blue chip Fortune 500 organizations. SalesCore has been a tremendous partner for Chally for 20 years, just really resounding in terms of the length and the amount of work and good work that we've done together. Pam operates in the Midwest right now, but she's also will be heading to South Carolina. So I think she's open to taking other opportunities as well as they progress. And I know in the digital environment, I think we all have the opportunity to stay connected in a new way. If you would like to work with Pam, she facilitates similar workshops like this as well. Just please keep that in mind as well. And we would love the opportunity to speak with you again individually or with any of your colleagues if you think that there's a need. So thank you, Pam. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining today.
Bye-bye.